Yeah, and thank you again that we may be together and share in this ceremony. I feel, in a way, that we are reconnecting with our a way of life that often happens when we are in search for meaning. And I feel this age gives us a tremendous quest to be able to explore the edges and the interiors of ourselves, to be able to ask what is coming next out of what we contemplate or what we gather to do. And yesterday's reflections and the questions themselves give me a lot to bring back together today. And but I'd like to open with a poem from D.H. Lawrence for my contribution in this morning's talk with you. And it's called Healing. And it brings me to the awareness that part of our collective work is to heal something that we have inherited, not only in our bodies, but as I said yesterday, in our deep self. And this is D.H. Lawrence's contribution to the idea of healing. He writes, "I am not a mechanism, an assembly of various sections. And it's not because the mechanism is working wrongly that I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul, to the deep emotional self. And the wounds to the soul take a long, long time, and only time can help, and patience, and a certain difficult repentance. Long, difficult repentance. Realizations of life's mistake, and the freeing oneself from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify." The realization of life's mistake and the freeing of oneself from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. I like the idea of mankind at large, or humankind at large, is doing something with the soul, even if we are not yet aware of it. We have a common, one can say, destiny at the deepest part of ourselves to realign with the healing and the medicine and the gifts and the creativity that we carry within ourselves. But he puts it in the context that there's time, and not the chronological time alone. And I said yesterday that we have this kairos time in us, the soul spiritual time, that could enter into any moment, into any place, into anyone, into any group, and alter the patterns of whatever we call our illness, our wounds, or in a certain way, our civilization. And so there is a doorway somewhere in consciousness for time to be altered, for consciousness to be altered, and for the reality to come into alignment with this higher purpose that collectively we're endeavoring to reach. And we're unable to do anything with our world without understanding the validity of technology, because the technological age is not just for our present civilization. This is one of the most ancient aspirations of humankind, to enter into the use of tools for the purpose of affecting life and environments and aligning us with our futures in a way that we could be able to bring out of ourselves these higher impulses of creativity. And I was thinking in my own preparation today, after last night's reflections, that the city, and where most of us now live in terms of our present age, is a technological framework. And a city began to be a city because of the use of technology. And so we can't have a city without it. And we can, in a certain way, meet the needs of all of us who live in cities around the world without technology. And so we've all become, at some level, technologists. And the understanding now is, what is it that we are agreeing to when we choose to live where we live, have what we have, and understand the consequence of wound and healing when we are choosing these ways of life and means of how we live. And so the age is also inviting us to ask as I said in the previous talk, what is it that we need from each other to be able to exercise the creativity of freedom and healing and enter into this other level of collaboration. And I'm sure by now you've had the contributions from Bruce and Sylvia around the technologies that are allowing people to collectively engage, sharing what we know and that what we can know from each other about our world and about our futures. But firstly, like, we become more aware of what we really know, and where does our maps of knowledge lead us. One of the things that I felt important to come back together around is, in thinking, is around perception. What do I take up in myself? And does the environment that we are in harms us with what we perceive? And how do we then deal with the transformation of that? Because I think in what I see as the trajectory of our collective aim is that we have a sensitivity in relationship to the other. And much more now, given our political climate around the world, how we perceive the other is tremendously a challenge that no technology will eliminate, because this level of perceiving is really, has to be done within the human being's life, which will then give us a new picture, a new image of the other human being and the potential of how we could relate for activities in the world. And I wanted to come back to this idea of what comes into me from the other human being and what awakes in me. And I want to thank Catherine for her question around dialogue, that what happens when I meet another human being? What changes in me? And this for me, represents the key point of say, what begins to become this new stage in consciousness. Because it's not that the person's history is just carried in them, is that at a certain point of encounter with another human being, that history enters me. And then I become awake. But what is this awakening? What does the content of my awakening hold? It also holds my unconsciousness. So a person brings me to consciousness of my unconsciousness. And there's something about that encounter that I didn't know would happen, that I would become more myself, but mostly integrated with unconsciousness. And because my unconsciousness in me is unfamiliar, I think it's the person that is causing me harm, when my unconsciousness has been causing me harm all my life. My unconsciousness is causing me harm, and it can cause me my death. But I didn't know that, and I live as though that will never happen. And I blame every other person for what happens to me, when they're only trying to help me become me, by even maybe bringing me some good problems to work on. Without a human being, next other human being, what will we do if there's nothing to awake unconsciousness and put it right into my feeling life and right into my conscious life to say, do something with this? And so this is the interesting part with my interest in this question of human encounters, is can I recover my willingness to be engaged with unconsciousness as part of my healing and part of the collective healing of our societies. And if we could eliminate the blaming and the projections on the other as responsible for the wound, and yes, they may be the deliverer of the conflict because they're also dealing with their unconsciousness. But if we choose as a society to say, this is a given, that unconsciousness is part of the inheritance of all of our lives, and we could become aware of how to enter into relationship with it. And I think this is what D.H. Lawrence is pointing to, that we're not just a mechanism of body and mind just taking in the world and being harmed by it or offended by it, but we have the capacity to add something that is not given, my own intention and my own certain way soul work to transform that. How do I do it? I move perception to cognition. So in the steps, the path to knowledge is that I have to become aware that in knowing something, I become responsible for doing something. And knowledge is not information alone. It's certain way it becomes imbued with life potential. And so life wants to be fulfilled, and it chooses a path of moving through the sense body, our senses, and taken up by our own inner will through our feeling life and into our thinking life, and then into an act of will in the world through social and cultural tasks that we take up. But at this juncture, when something is to become knowledge, is where I think our age is really troubled. That, do I really want to be responsible for knowing in a way that will allow a kind of development to happen where I hold myself responsible for what that knowledge is generating. This juncture of knowledge where we cannot resist the temptation or the challenge of minimizing it or denying it or refusing to acknowledge it, is our crisis. We feel that if we eliminate certain people from the world, my life will get better. If we put them in prison, if we put them away, if we provide privilege more for certain groups, lives will get more meaningful. But at the heart of it is the kind of knowledge that we are developing, that we exclusively want to keep to ourselves. And it doesn't become the act of will in the world according to the lawfulness of the knowledge itself. And so one of the interests that we've had over the couple of decades of this kind of work is to ask people to really share their knowledge so that we can move from self-knowing to collective understanding or shared understanding between others. To then hold that space for something else, the healing that happens when we have a shared understanding. Much of what I'm speaking to happens as a kind of super conscious activity, but we can also make it conscious when we're willing to reveal to the other, this is what I'm thinking, because you know what you're thinking. And in the dialogue process, it's best to reveal it, to say, you know, this is what your presence, your ideas, what you shared is awakening in me. And I want to explore it with you. Because in the dialogue, we are awakening to forces that have been hidden from ourselves and each other for a long time. And this is why the information age is not just what is stored in databases on computers. The information age is also the awakening of consciousness around hidden memories in the human soul and in the ancestries of our lives. Current physics share the idea that the physical body stores 5 generations of memory. So 6 to 2 people's life stories are being carried in my body. I don't personally know all of the stories, all of the personality, and yet it has a consequence on my existence and potentially my future. And this body, much more than what we could yet call it, we still call it a body, but it's more complex in the sense that it communicates from the past. It communicates beyond dimensions where we currently reside or where we're present. It has linkages to all these dimensions of beings who have contributed to its existence. And if we just take that into consideration, that we're sitting with our ancestral memory together, and whatever that story is shaping our inner dialogue and shaping the potential dialogue between us, then what is the kind of reverence I should have when I contemplate myself, my own life, or contemplate the life of another human being? how much more present I can be when my contemplation holds this reverence that we're not just a mechanism of various parts, as D.H. Lawrence puts it. And I'm not unconscious because I'm not trying to know something. I'm unconscious because I've inherited it. I have to take on a world that I didn't live in before. And I have to take on the stories of people who I don't even know in my own body. And that's just the personal part. The cultural part gets even more challenging because now you're attracted to people who might give you, through karma, a tremendous challenge of being who you ought to be in the world. So if we could have known all of that consciously before, will you still have chosen to be you? You know, there's a question about initiation. If you know how hard it's going to be, will you still choose it in order to become a knower of the existence that you were in and the futures that can come from that existence? Most people will say no. Knowledge is too hard when we know it ahead of time, and the circumstances too difficult when we know what we have to transform. That's why some things have to remain unconscious for a while. And that's why we have to, in a certain way, develop these moral techniques to be able to trust the next phase of what is coming from my life. And the beauty in all of this, I said the beauty and goodness and truth in all of this, is that human beings have done it before. And in every age, it feels like this. It feels like we don't know what will happen next. And yet creativity brings us out of the past and into a kind of present capacity of trust and difficulty. And in this tension between what I'm afraid of and what I hope for, between what I've lost and what I'm gaining strength with, the human being is awakened. And this technician, this technologist in us wants to be able to navigate a stream of agreements that will, in a certain way, honor the collective striving that D.H. Lawrence says humanity at large has chosen to sanctify, meaning we've chosen to work on it together and create the agreement that this is our collective need and, in a certain way, birthright. It's not easy. None of what I'm saying is about just trusting alone. I'm still talking about becoming a knower. And as an adult, a stage in which knowing is not just of myself, it's also about the knowing of the other. And making oneself very conscious that the other is necessary if I'm going to be me. I don't know if we were able to do the exercise yesterday with the door. Has that been done? No? Okay. It's still to come. We would have done it in our workshop time together. But I want to give a picture of this, like between us, between two human beings, is a door. This one and the other creates a space. And in this space, that is both timeless, spaceless, something happens in this dooring of mutual consciousness. It is a process that we can't help but create because it's in our supernature, it's in our super consciousness to create this door. Why? All the ages of our times, present and past, have tried to answer this. If it's our nature to have a why so complex that is never going to just be answered by one level of reality, but just how two human beings could be the door for another human being to come into the physical world through birth, through conception and birth, we also hold the doors for other realities to happen as well. And the question is, what do we want to happen if we two or more come together? Because society depends on that knowing and that willingness to enter into the mystery of that door or those doors, because they're created for many different relationships. And on the everyday level of our world, we form these associations and these communities to engage some daily work to make our cities run and make our lives meaningful and make our institutions meaningful. But we also know that nature depends on it. And from the superconscious level, above the everyday mind, we're influencing nature's dialogue with us in relationship to the places where we are on the earth, and the magnetism and the dynamism that we attract and create when we are a group anywhere, affecting the ecology of nature through the ecology of our consciousness. That it's a huge thing for two or more people to be together. The consequence of it is far-reaching when we become conscious of the kind of influence that we will have if we investigate our collective intention for doing anything together. And so this is our age. The age is the space between us. And we are now aware that so much can happen when two of us come together. Because a certain kind of technology begins to become self-conscious. We're not just creating anymore just knowledge. But technique and knowledge. or we call technology. The study of what our will could do to share the deeper impulses of what our souls hold for futures to come. Because we have to create doorways for other kinds of realities to come into the world, to refine and develop our cities from just being overpopulated with scarce constructs, inadequate economies, inadequate housing, inadequate markets, we've lived with this inadequacy for a long time, but we've coming to the point of knowing now that it's not just peak oil, but peak capacities for dealing with the complexity of our age and releasing the collective consciousness through processes that we are now introducing as Bruce's work, systemics, and Jane Laurent's work in systemics, and others who are contributing to how do we work from the future, as someone shared about Arthur Schommer's work yesterday. There are futures that require human beings to create the appropriate doors for it to enter into manifestation of our world. And this is what I think we are crafting a conversation around. The first wave of this is that some people think AI will do it without us. The critical thing about beings in other realities that require human beings and not tools to make sense and meaning for the futures that we have to create. Because the context is important. One can say, for example, that this is a cup. Well, I set the context for that when I choose to drink from it. But if I choose to put my paper here and rest this cup on it, it's a paperweight. I also choose that context for it. This is the human being's reality. When to change the context to allow something else to have a meaning and functionality, and when to create a door appropriate to the futures that we're trying to bring into the world. And so this dooring remains a capacity not only for bodies to pass in through time and into manifestation, but also to allow the other levels of mind and soul to pass through those doors as well and into reality as such. And again, there are many schools of how to do that. So it's not so much I'm choosing a preference of how doors are opened, because we've been in this kind of historical schooling for centuries. Every age has its teachers for how we open the door to futures. Many of us are connected to anthroposophy as one of the doors to the higher worlds of cognition. Many are in a certain way working from the participation and awareness of the natural world, of what nature is teaching us about deep perception and deep ecology, permaculture, and all these various pathways of leading human beings to awareness of the subtle sensitivities we can develop for understanding nature at its more primal levels. But the social path, the social age, and where social technologies could become more useful, is that this really is human. There are no substitute for the social. We are responsible for deciding what we can share. Everything's working okay?
There's some outside noise, so we're closing the windows.
Okay.
Christ is coming. Okay, we continue.
Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's good to close the windows, but the doors might stay open. Someone might be trying to find a room. Thank you. So I was just saying that the social part is really our human. In the age of all the technologies, in the age of all the complexities, the social element is a question that I ask of each person. What do you need from me? Because I have to, in a certain way, awake to this capacity in myself that we could share, that I could share. And as I said, there are no substitutes for that part. That the door becomes more socially significant. And my own kind of identity as a placeholder for one part of that door becomes more socially significant when this question becomes more true to me. The agreements that I can make to hold the other person in responsibility and accountability for the social aims of our society and the health of our societies is really a critical part of our time. Because the social part is not a kind of status. We're not hired to be social. We really can't be hired to be social. This is really where the deep freedom of the human being dwells. When I can link my will to someone else's and still sustain their freedom and support and inspire their creativity, and they do the same for me. Without this medicine, without this healing gesture, the powers that occupy politics, economics, and cultural positions will remain somewhat diminished. Because all that knowledge is not useful without the social well-being of our humanity. So our technique here is, can I make room in my feeling life for the other? That enduring in the adequating of our collective will to coherence of what could be carried in it, or what can come into the world through it. This process requires eye contact. Not just the physical eye contact, but the eye contact of the heart. That I am with you because you're with me, and we are with a potential that if we choose not to attend to it, that potential could be lost. That opportunity could be lost. And so this gesture is futuring, dooring, liberating of our self-interest in the interest of the sharing. And through this gesture, the human life moves time from past to present, from future to present. So the time beings that live in our time bodies is what I'm speaking to. The soul is a time being that requires a time body, mind, and physical life to enter into our age. And in this case, the age of humanity, when humanity's power is what we're trying to sanctify. D.H. Lawrence says, we're trying to make sense of ourselves. What is our role in the universe? What is our role on earth? If we're not just mechanisms, what are we? And if I'm just that carrier of a wound of history, then what am I aspiring for as future? And in this space, the answer is that we are trying to become ourselves. Not as a placeholder in some position in the world, not as, just an architect of the world, but a host, a host for the world. And who is the guest? The future. And like any good host, we can prepare for that future, those futures, and adjust accordingly for how long we want that to be here. And so I'm using these analogies, but these are processes in consciousness. And I'm trying to just reveal them, that there are processes in consciousness, and that what they do is bring us into situations to remind us that these are methods and techniques for what consciousness must now meet, given our age, given what we carry in ourselves, what we've inherited in our bodies, what we've inherited in our cultural stories, and what we now carry in our souls for doing something more. So where do we begin? In the task of knowing. And I'm just reminded that the term "be careful what we ask for," but I think that carefulness has been it's not even appropriate anymore to just be careful. One must be concerned with the needs of the other, to ask for a certain kind of unreasonable step in our pursuit of this level of knowing. Meaning sometimes reasoning about it will stop it from happening, because we might not be willing, if we know the consequence of loving another human being. And so love is not so reasonable. It has the biggest risk in it, not only for betrayal, but for failure as well. But it's the only technique left to bring human beings into the kind of responsibility for adoring and reflecting with each other this inner substance of our age, this fire that is not in nature and not in culture, but in the cosmos that is in us. This power to create an event, not for myself, but for the other. And this is what love is. I create it not for me. It's not useful for myself at a level in which I just dedicate it and I become more myself. The power of love is a giving of it to the other so that the other may become themselves by my giving. This pedagogy, one can't even teach it. It's not a can't do a course on loving to the degree that we do it perfectly. There are some courses that are really good about teaching people not to withhold their love, meaning to deal with the psychological and challenges and the wounds that keep us from really being intimate and open to the other. And those courses are good. If we need them, do use them. But it's the predisposition of the human being to arrive at a place in which we perceive something and our conscience tells us we have to do more with that perception, take it deeper into myself with the question, what is this awakening in me? What does this have to do with the other person? And what does this have to do with the future? Because this is the extension, me, the other, and the future. I can turn it back and make it all about me and disregard the fact that the other is trying to help with something. And that if I can become a door to my own processes of development, I can become responsible for holding a kind of vision with that person and with those groups of people for that place and for the times beyond now. This form of presentation we call Ndaba. I developed it after some work in South Africa, and it's not a teaching. It's more like a storytelling. In fact, that's what Ndaba is, telling of a story. And so I give it this form intentionally to eliminate the level of what we call facts. Not that what I'm saying does not factually base, I'm just saying it's not about accounting where or when this was true. But to trust something in the listener, that there are parts of the story in you that is not in what I'm saying. But I trust that the parts of what I'm saying can awake the story in you and do something in creating a kind of knowledge that is not born out of facts, but born out of attentional forces, that what you're doing now in this kind of concentrated way is the level of knowing that leads to the soul. It doesn't just lead to the mind, it leads to this ancestral memory. It leads to the creativity that has been waiting to be hosted by this form of practice that says, we are here for this purpose of not doubting who we are together and what could happen when we invoke unique parts of ourselves and let the healing happen. So there's a part of this that has this kind of ceremonial feeling, because I give reverence to the parts of the human self that has been really exiled from our discourses and our institution. I give priority for the part of the human being that is unconscious. And the love for that part of our collective beingness. And so it's not to the part that holds knowledge that is really critical to this engagement of practice. And in Daba, it says that even in the body, as it lives and moves and has its being, there is a need for at least one other person to trust its future. And the body knows how to perceive this level of vibrational energy. And so it begins to awake from there, because the logos, the being that gives its power of healing, has made its way into the human being at the most remote part of our unconscious life, so that we can awake. And so in the framework of esoteric science and philosophy, we've come to accept and understand from that level of acceptance that the human being carries within us the power to restore and transform ourselves from forgetfulness, to this sense of possibility and openness. And within all of those pedagogies of world knowledge, each of our souls can find a unique pathway by really following the course of this inner feeling of what's guiding us. And so one of the principles in this exercise is the acceptance that there is some kind of guidance for what brings us into this kind of meeting with each other. And what's navigating our inner reflections every day when we consider that there is something to learn and do together. And we could really benefit from each other's knowledge in doing it. So I would bring this into sharing if there's some reflections that you would like to make, and work from there together. Thank you.
Anyone with questions, please raise your hand. Yeah. Please come over. And we'll make sure that he can see you. So there's a little video screen. Hello, Orland.
Hey, Matt.
It's all. Step a little bit back.
Yes, that's good there.
Thank you for your talk.
Yeah.
You talked about developing model techniques to trust the next phase of our life and to trust in what's coming in the future. And also just then finishing on accepting that there's something that's guiding us. And I was wondering, how do you kind of deepen that trust and deepen that trust in life, as opposed to being like afraid of what's going to happen in the future, or the uncertainty of things, and to deepen that trust, and how do we accept, to deepen the trust and that we're being guided in life.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. You may have observed a child learning to walk. At a baby age, how sensitive it is to the forces of levity that is working in the inner will to motivate them to stand and take that step. And this is the kind of movement, of kind of balancing that happens. The child puts their hands out and reaches for something that is not there. One can say even the future is that gesture. There is a kind of inner law that if I go towards it, it comes towards me. So it's in the body from the certain way, the lawfulness of human development. But it's also in the cycles of the years of our lives. Some refer to the 7-year cycle. That each 7 years of our life, we generate another level of soul development that becomes useful for body, mind, and culture. When we enter it, yes, with the right help at different stages. Adolescence is very, very a hard stage, but so is midlife, where when we live until 49, 56, and we still haven't figured out who am I, we have to re-enter into that inner law. And so it's essential to say, what is it that we've been following in the development of the human life? How we do it is really observing one's own story. At the different points in the turns and opportunities of your life, what helped you to say yes? And what was the discoveries you made when you said yes to something that was uncertain? And particularly because it was uncertain, we had to allow a development to happen in ourselves because we didn't know. And this hidden part, is the mystery of the human being. As much as we think we know, there's right before the act of decision, we dissolve all attachments to our knowledge and we become human. And we create a step in the decision that is not even remotely connected to all the motivation and knowledge that we had before. We cross a gap when we make a decision. And energy from all the powers of our collective consciousness and futures come in to the personal part of the life. This can't be really explained as just a phenomenon of mind and body. One has to understand that when a future enters into the body, we had no preconception that it will. because it enters from a dimension far beyond the calculations and quantifications that we do in our regular worldviews. And so part of the trust is that it's an innate, a kind of intuition. We can have a feeling for it, feeling for this truth, but the truth leads us to the intuition. Because trusting is a constant development of something that allows us to overcome our own self-knowledge, meaning I know why I shouldn't trust, but trusting is going to happen anyway because there's some law far beyond my knowledge that makes me do it. And this leads us to, we say, becoming more ourselves. Because there's no mechanism for trust. And I agree with D.H. Lawrence's poem. We're not a form of mechanisms that we can verify why everything happened the way it does. Particularly the mechanisms for us being in relationship. What is it? What makes you a friend? Show me the mechanism in me that says, I will choose you as my friend. There's no such mechanism other than my willingness to share my life and you share yours. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
So bona, Orland.
Yeah, well, so good to see you.
I have a willingness to want to be a better colleague, a better co-worker with you and others in this work. And I'm wondering if you feel there might be any paths to that.
Oh, well, this is it. This is the path to it right here happening. Yeah, I agree that there's a need for deepening all of our intentions collectively. And I think the wind tunneling process that Bruce will introduce will be an ongoing platform for us to figure out the how to do more. And I feel that this is an opportunity to really understand that we have now these technologies that will allow us to move beyond the limitations of place and time to the degree that we could now work on the appreciating the principles that have made us who we are for each other. And asking again, as you just did, what else do we need to agree about sharing to do that? And so my intention was to be there for this very purpose of this question. And I think Rose is, returned home to do this with others in the community there, and Matt and Inga and others who I know are hosting this, not just as a conference, but really hosting a kind of future. And we have friends all over the world that are going to be watching this on Facebook who are aiming to do the same. And so I thank you for choosing to be in the exercise of this, because I think it will lead to a deepening of our commitment for what can come into our world and the healing that can happen as a result of being together. And so I welcome that.
Yes, how do we become closer to this time being in our body that you're talking about? Human life moves time, and sometimes we need to expand time, and I don't know how, but it happens sometimes. So could you sort of give any indications?
Yes. I appreciate the question very much. And I think Rose spoke to it yesterday as the golden silence. William Blake, I think it was who said that every day has a moment of eternity in it. And so the first dynamics of this event is to change time from being more minutes or hours to being what it is, presence of presence. So I shut off all my distractions from wanting more of anything and just hold attention to intention, meaning that you can give yourself the time you need, one moment at a time. And the moments add up to become not just more hours, but a deepening connection to the eternality, to the inner beingness that reorganizes time so that you can have more. The mental model of our life and our day takes up our eternal powers. And so by the end of the day, we've used up eternity in 24 hours. How do we do that? Because of our mental models and the frameworks of that I'm not gaining anything, I'm just losing something. Well, I would say the wisdom that's in your life, and I can see that you have lived some years of life, that in this body of aged wisdom, you have more time. Meaning that every day that's lived has created an inner process. We just have to decide that it's there. So this is the part of the age of eldership that I feel is really critical to our civilization. Because we think as we get older, we're going to lose something. And this is the scarcity model of our world given to us by the kind of education that we've inherited. But if I choose now, if you choose that there is some kind of knowing in you that can resolve this crisis, and that different, as I said, because of the age processes, it affects our psyche very differently. But there's a power now that we're all recovering, which has to do with time. But we have to make that space, we have to make that agreement that it's okay to take a few minutes for this process. So it's a decision first, that you're not to gain anything or lose anything by taking that time. It's just to be. And so to make time for being is a cancellation of all the mental stuff that demands our time. So even if you put it into your schedule, to say at a certain hour of every day, I will make this a free space of any obligation and rest. Relax the mind, relax the body, relax any commitments to the outer frameworks, and see what enters. It's a kind of observational field. When time comes, it doesn't give you more of anything other than more of yourself. And as you said, it happens intuitionally every day, but we can also make it a practice, a conscious practice. And I think this is really what we are all, in a certain way, hoping that time come back to us. But in this general space, like this conference is actually, and I heard when Rose was sharing how the days will go, in it, I can hear how time can be recovered. So it's part of a design process for our days as well, and our time together in work, that we make this golden silent moment more part of it. but you'll see in the exercises that I'm sure Bruce will introduce with wind tunneling, is that sharing knowledge, sharing capacities, sharing will recover a large part of our world that takes up a lot of time to do by ourselves. And so when we are in these kinds of collective endeavors, more happen. But as much as I would say it's the simpler part of it is just to step out of the everyday stuff for even 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and rest. Let what happens happen. Thank you.
Good morning, Orland, or good evening.
Good evening. Hi, good morning, Bruce.
Yesterday you spoke about story. Today you've really emphasized story. I wonder if you would take some time, either now or sometime soon, to tell us about the experience of your book and the telling of the story. Because I think what you've captured in the book is embodiment of much of what we're focusing on, and how it creates a basis for you and the importance of it for you in the work that's happening and going on into the future. And I think it's a new story, or a new story that you have to tell about story. What was it like, that journey? And how did it grow as the story developed, as the research went on and so on? And I think that would help us to have a very practical example of some of the challenges you're putting to us about this ancestral story that we're all part of.
I'll probably reserve some for tomorrow, but for now, I would say that thank you so much for the question, Bruce. That my own story awoke me in a conflict with a teacher when I was about 5 years old. The teacher wanted my attention, and I was in this inner space in dialogue with my own soul. I didn't know that was what I was doing. Some people call it daydreaming. But I was in conversation with some level of myself. And when I turned to give my attention to the teacher, I observed her inner dialogue was whether she should punish me for not paying attention. And it awoke me that there is these two ways of looking at one's own thoughts. And I observed her for a while and felt the inner conflict when she decided that, her authority was more valid and that she wanted this power over me. And I remember making this inner decision. Some part of me made a decision. I will not allow another's authority to be that powerful over myself, but also not allow my own mind to overshadow this part of my heart. And I woke up much earlier the next day to prepare to be in this level of observation. I woke up 2 hours earlier every day from that moment on and sat before my family awoke and thought about being aware that someone else wants to decide who I am. And I chose from that part that any decision, I would have to agree in my heart, that's what I will do. And I chose that, okay, if they're going to teach me something, I also have to love it. And I went to school to love what I was studying, not to just be taught to be a knower. And that was the first part, that the knowledge had to have not meaning alone for the passing the tests. It had to really enter my life. And I questioned everything at a level in which teachers had to actually do more work to bring me into the dialogue. And when they didn't want to do that, I had to find other teachers, because it wasn't anymore just about knowledge. And so this led me to recovering, Bruce, as you said, a connection to what I brought into the world. And it affected me all through my adolescence. It affected me through my young adult life. And it brought people into my life that provided me the unique challenges to open the door to my soul's knowing. And whether that was happening in my neighborhoods that I grew up in the environments that I was in the educational institutions that I went to, but more so it happened when I was asking myself questions that led to deeper recollection of memory. I think I chose to be in solitude and silence a lot more than most of my other siblings. I chose to be in this kind of meditative inquiry that I spoke about a moment ago. But then it attracted the teachers who will begin now to teach me exactly how to use my own will to cross boundaries of my soul and utilize these other, we call occult faculties. And so in my youth, through my young adult, I began to exercise working on the occult aspects of consciousness, the hidden parts of my own unconscious life, how to awake it and utilize it. In my adult work, the part that really brought my life forward, I will share more deeply in tomorrow's contribution. But where it stands right now for me, and what this book that Bruce mentioned is a contribution to share the parts of the story that have been recovered through my own investigation, but it's not limited to my own knowing. This is still a kind of tradition of Indaba to say, who else have been thinking about this, and what's your part in the story? And anyone can enter that story. It doesn't require to have been born into an African historical context, but humanity at large has a part to play in the defining of what happens with this story as it is being recovered now collectively. Why I chose Los Angeles as a place for not only my work in the outer world, but really where my soul is, and it's called the City of Angels. And this is not just a kind of name. There are forces here that requires human initiation at a level of the soul, meaning it's not an easy city to just get by in. And it's, yeah, on one level, you know, there's Hollywood and all of that. But on another level is the real work on occult science and occult philosophy, because there are those whose lives are touching it and they don't have anyone to hold the door with them for those deeper mysteries to fulfill itself. And I found that here in 1984 when I came to Los Angeles the first time, and I decided to stay, use my schooling time here and my development until I found my teacher in Gnostic science, who had founded his school here in 1941. and found his teachers here in the 1920s. And they all were part of the occult society in the Theosophical movement and others, shaping the right use of Los Angeles as a city for angelic work, meaning futures that have to do with the higher conception of reality, not just in nature, but beyond nature. And that there is a kind of responsibility here to affect that in the agreements we create in sharing our lives. And I'm so grateful that in this city, in this place, and in other cities and communities that I've traveled to, I've been able to find colleagues in the work of initiating the human will beyond just the cultural frameworks that we have been living in, but to prepare ourselves for what is being asked of us. So there's much more to share. I won't do it now. I know there's a break coming up for you and probably already past that time, but I thank you, Bruce, for inviting this. And I look forward to being able to share more with you. Thanks, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Orland. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Orland. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Yeah,
yes.
We're going to all walk away now and take a breath and then try
all right.
sort of share with each other what we thought you might have said.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So
bye for now. Bye for now.
Later, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.